People of Reddit with security cameras. What is the creepiest thing you've caught on video? It was my phone alerted me, human movement detected on the security camera. Opening my phone, it played the clip at once. It was a low quality, but depicted terror. A dark, shadowy figure standing outside the window, squatting down and disappearing into the night. We discussed the instance all day, wondering if we should stay up to see if it happened the next night, going to rewatch the footage to check the exact timestamp. It was a delight to realize it had rendered in the hours away and was now high quality. It was the cat. The cat was the creepy shadow man squatting down. The fucker just sat in a weird pose by the camera and jumped out of frame. My partner and I worked at a private school that was built right at the edge of a Native American historic site. When the founders began to build, they found remains, and local government stopped them from building to preserve the area as wealthy folks do. They just built the school, set back against the woods, rather than in the open field as they intended, and used the field for sports and recess. Obviously, Native people lived throughout the area, not just the one field that was protected. The school was very paranormally active. They didn't install cameras until a few years after we began there. But the guy would regularly show us videos of doors opening on their own, basketballs being rolled through the gym, and shadows walking through the halls in the middle of the night. It had a very spooky vibe and felt very unwelcoming, which makes sense. Worked at a psychiatric hospital, seen plenty of naked people running around, weird rituals or behaviors. It was the only time I was freaked out was when I watched a man Blair Witch in the corner of a dark room for 3 straight hours. Also when a man ran out of his room, naked and bleeding from his face, and ran so fast, slamming into the doors to the outside of the unit, crossing 3 different cameras in the span of 5 seconds. Way too fast, but he was Jesus. And he said that rapture can't start without him. A year ago, we got our house. Since we were still getting used to it, we thought maybe it was haunted. We also recently bought a Furbo and placed it in a room that we passed through, but don't usually stay in. We kept getting person alerts, but when we check it, there was never anyone recorded. We eventually figured it out. The Furbo had a bit of a delay and just always missed us. It was very creepy at first though. I got startled by a Furby going off when I helped move a box one time. The person who saw it happen was surprised I didn't seem too scared. But I recognized the Furby voice right away, even though I barely knew of these things. And this was right after they were popular. Not me, but my aunt. She showed the footage to us. Her doorbell would ring a few times at night, consistently checked the footage. And there weren't people. But you could see 2 translucent things approach the camera. Then you would hear the doorbell. They would stay there for a couple minutes, then drift off. She had experienced things in the house too. But the 2 lights never moved into the house. They approached the door, ring the doorbell a few times and then leave. We think it's old friends of the original owners, since the house is over 70 years old. So I live way out in the country, and the most crazy thing I have ever seen on my cameras was a big old bobcat, and he kept circling around my house like he was trying to hunt something inside of the house, like one of my kids or dogs. He did this multiple times for many nights. A Chinese gentleman visiting my house every day just after 1 p.m. He would come in my gate, sit on my lawn, and eat a bowl of noodles. When finished, he would say a little prayer and be off on his way. One day when I was home from work sick, I went out to join him. He couldn't speak English. We both sat there in silence. He ate his noodles, I ate my sandwich. He shook my hand and left. I never saw him again. I used to work in a fairly upscale resort. The whole place was covered with CCTV, so in the security control room, you had a pretty good overview of everything. We had guards assigned to patrol the hotel at all times of the night. One guy did his rounds by the pool. Then the supervisor was watching on the screens and saw that there was a lady following him. So he radioed the guard and asked who was behind him. He turns around and on the screen, he appears to be looking directly at her. But he calls back and says, "What lady, it's just me here." So the supervisor thinks he is just joking around and said, "Okay, sure man." About an hour later, The guard reports in at the control room, and the supervisor asked him again who that was, and it became obvious that he really had no idea what he was talking about. So they pulled up the footage and was undeniable that he would have seen the woman. After their radio exchange, he kept walking around and the woman followed him and then went her separate way, but never showed up on another screen. I was the front office manager at the time and was asked to investigate which hotel guest that was. However, we couldn't find anyone matching the lady. In the video, she just walked into the frame at the pool and walked out of the frame again, seemingly out of thin air, and never saw her again. The security guard put in a transfer request. The next day back when I managed a donut shop, I saw a guy staring at me, a young woman, and the other employee, also a young woman. He was dressed in dark clothes and a dark hat. When he realized we could see him, he ran off. I locked all the doors and the drive-through window. Thankfully, it was closing time anyway. A worker called her best friend, a very large young man on the wrestling team, who walked us to our cars. Where he was standing was a point of poor visibility from inside. After the sun went down, our store had a deep porch, and along the window, he was staring through. There was a wall-mounted bar counter at night. We turned the stools over and put them on the bar, so the chairs were blocking the view of the window. If he hadn't moved suddenly, I might never have noticed him. Before we left, I decided to review the cameras to see if I could see him get into a car. I went back to the moment I noticed him and kept rewinding. He'd been staring at us from the dark of night for 3 hours. I installed some security cameras at my place after my neighbor told me that they thought they'd been hearing someone walking around my yard at night. Skinned through the footage the very next morning and saw a guy who came into frame wearing only boxers and laced-up combat boots. He stood by my bedroom window, stared in for about 45 minutes, then walked back out of frame. I was able to get a pretty good look at his face, and that's when I realized that I've been sleepwalking. I have no idea how long it's been going on, or where else I've been at night, and that terrifies me. I honestly think I might have preferred seeing an actual intruder. Find you someone to tie you up at night, or in general if you're into that sort of thing. Not me, but a friend of mine. One morning, he woke up to a decapitated deer head on his lawn. He said it's normal for his town, but it still freaked him out. And I mentioned maybe he saw who put it there on his security cameras. He said he didn't see them. All he saw was a black van slowly roll up onto the lawn, open up, and the deer head got lowered by a clamp, like a robot arm at a car factory. And then the van slowly rolled off. He found out who the guy was, because there's only 2 people who randomly own a robot arm like that, and only one of them knew where he lived. But that was still creepy to hear about, let alone witness yourself. Sorry, no footage, but this shook us to the core. My brother was a manager of a bar in the UK, and with the position came the flat above it to live in one night. My brother is woken up by the fire alarm going off and the smell of smoke. He grabs his wife and newborn baby and head for the exits. The place was full of black smoke, but thankfully they all got out safe. After the fire was put out, the investigation was done. It was ruled as arson. The police took the CCTV footage to look over. They called my brother to show him that at around 2:00 a.m. in the morning, a young boy about the age of 12-13 is seen walking past the bar, stops for a second, and walks away. About 15 minutes later, the same young lad returns with what looks like a Coke bottle and a small hammer, smashes one of the little windows, pours the contents of the bottle inside, and sets it alight. He stands and watches for about 5 minutes or so until it was ablaze, and then just walks off. Did not recognize the child. And the police had no reports of missing kids that may be out at that time in the morning. We never found out who he was or why he did it. But the thought of a child being able to do something so callous was chilling Jesus. Plus the fact he's probably still walking around, potentially doing evil stuff as he gets older. Not sure if you're counting dashcam footage. But there was a video of a dude with a bomb collar on that had robbed a bank. I think said someone kidnapped him and put it on him. He blew up. He was sitting up against a police car. Worst part was like 3 seconds before he started trying to back up. And in panic because he knew he was about to go chilling, man. I have a friend on PSN who was a prison guard. He was assigned to the CCTV when he saw some guy sneak up behind a guard and choke him. That guy's alive, just with a bit of brain damage from what I understand. He had to call it, and turns out the fire disappeared when the guards cornered him in the courtyard, like he just sank into the ground. I was taking a video with a drone over my grandparents' property. It was flying through a rye field, and in the field was a little red shed. This was not part of my grandparents' land. I decided to fly closer to it, and the door flies open, and a hairy creature comes out, chases my drone, because it was the first-person perspective, and scared the shit out of me. I worked in one of the oldest buildings in my college town. It was once a Wild West saloon where 2 people were documented to be killed in a shootout, when the state was still a territory. In the 20s, it served as someone's house, where the youngest daughter was documented to have died in childhood. When I got hired on, even the owners talked about it being haunted. I've never truly seen a ghost or had an encounter, but something about the building, particularly the office to the back, and definitely the dirt basement, did not feel right to me at all. Not malevolent, but always off. My first closing shift, after I got promoted to key holder. I'm also helping a new girl who has really taken the whole ghost spiel she got a few days prior to heart. This particular store ranged from small little treasures that were almost too easy not to steal to a few items that cost 5 times the going rate for tuition at the local college. Naturally, the owners had 15 cameras installed that played on a live feed in the office and in the storefront for customers to see, to know they weren't being slick. I'm counting the drawer, and she's anxiously watching the security camera, just waiting to see something crazy. I'm putting the final totals into the calculator, and she screams. She calls me over to the camera feed, and there it is on the top right feed. Very clearly, there is what looks like a figure in a white, boxy nightgown type dress. We are both near pissing our pants, but we can't leave. There's still a bunch of stuff to get done in the owners, and the opener tomorrow will be pissed if we ditch this last half of closing responsibilities. On account of a ghost. We watch it stunned as it appears to sway. Suddenly, a huge spider obscures the view of the figure. We 2 grown women have been near tears for what feels like ages, because we've been watching a spider web that the AC blew into the view of the camera. My stepdad woke up one morning and found a bucket of fried chicken in our driveway for some reason. He did not think that this was odd at all, but I did and checked our camera recordings. Ends up being, this lady walked up to my car at like 3 a.m. with a bucket. She was obviously homeless and probably on drugs. When the camera light turned on, she yelled, "I brought you some chicken," and left the bucket on the ground by my car. To this day, I wonder what was up with the chicken lady. I was looking for a lost calf out in the woods one night and found a game camera I didn't recognize on the property. It got a few pictures of me. It was my boss's friend, and she had forgotten to tell me about it. My boss had a good laugh when her friend checked his camera and nervously told her there was a guy with a shaggy beard and a handgun wandering around the woods in the middle of the night.